Have you ever really thought about all the different major Nintendo franchises and how weird they really are? Plumbers who save a princess from a giant lizard? 10-year-olds who force their pets to fight until they pass out? A pink puffball that eats living creatures but we don't care because he's fucking adorable? Those series are all weird as hell, but shockingly, they aren't the weirdest concept that Nintendo has ever come up with. And remember, we're only talking about major titles because otherwise we'd be getting into some really weird shit. What's more ridiculous than talking humanoid animals flying spaceships with foxes trying to fuck? Yep, we're talking Star Fox today. Star Fox began in 1993, where the first game, shockingly called Star Fox, was released for the Super Nintendo, although it was called Star Wing in Europe for some reason. Is the word fox inappropriate over there? This was Nintendo's second ever 3D game, only after X for the Game Boy. But this was the start of polygonal graphics for Nintendo. These games' graphics in the 3D style was famously created using the Super FX chip. This chip helped create some of the most iconic games of the time, even including Yoshi's Island. It's clearly not used in the same way as Star Fox though. The game follows a group called Star Fox. Who would have guessed? Who were defending their home world of Corneria from Andross. You get to fly around in spaceships and blow shit up, and who doesn't love that? Except when you have to save Slippy from getting shot down just for him to get attacked again 10 seconds after you save him. You'd think with a name like Slippy he'd be able to get away from enemies better. Although Star Fox only sold about 1/7 the amount of copies as the highest selling Super Nintendo game, Super Mario World. Jesus Christ, that game was popular. This was one of the most important games for Nintendo. It showed that 3D games were very possible, and even though it wasn't the prettiest, Star Fox was only the beginning. The next generation of consoles came with a Nintendo 64, and with that came the rise of 3D games. And of course, Star Fox got a new game in Star Fox 64 for, you guessed it, the Nintendo 64. That console had the most creative names, don't you think? Although this was called Lilat Wars in Europe. Again, you tell me, is the word star or fox inappropriate over there? The game is essentially a reboot of the original game, but just on a more powerful console. The gameplay is more or less the same, but with a few new aspects sprinkled in here and there. Instead of solely using the R-Wing, you can now use the Landmaster and a submarine. Yeah, the story and the gameplay are basically the same, but the controls and graphics were improved, and now there's voice acting instead of those weird bumbling noises.
Here comes a big one!
At least they tried. They even added branching gameplay paths so the experience wasn't too repetitive. Plus, there's multiplayer up to 4 players. The game even allowed for Rumble if you used the Rumble Pack. We've come a long way since the 90s when Rumble was sold separately. Star Fox 64 was everything the original was meant to be, plus more, which made it one of the best-selling Nintendo 64 games ever and is widely regarded as one of the best games of all time, period. A few years passed and Nintendo unveiled their newest console in the Nintendo GameCube. Everyone was waiting on a new Mario, Zelda, Kirby, Metroid, and Star Fox game for the system. Some of these franchises' most popular games came from the GameCube. Everyone always talks about Mario Sunshine, Wind Waker, Metroid Prime, and even though Kirby's Air Ride wasn't a main series game, it's still so damn good, especially with City Trial. So why does nobody talk about the first Star Fox game for the GameCube? It's cause the game is fucking weird. Star Fox Adventures was released on September 23rd, 2002 and was developed by Rare. And if you watched my recent video on Banjo-Kazooie, you know that Rare used to be amazing back in the day, until they were bought by Microsoft, and fun fact, this was the last game Rare developed to be released on a Nintendo console, as Microsoft purchased Rare literally the day after this game was released. Which, looking back at it, it's probably a good thing. I mean, could you imagine if Nuts and Bolts was released on the Wii? Star Fox Adventures was originally going to be a game called Dinosaur Planet for the N64, and it was completely unrelated to the Star Fox series. But after Miyamoto reviewed the content of the game, he noticed that the appearance of the main character called Saber was incredibly similar to Fox McCloud. The game was then turned into a Star Fox title and pushed back to be a launch title for the GameCube. Yeah, that didn't happen. Many of the characters and traits from the original game can be seen in Adventures. I mean, just look at the artwork. Krystal is literally right front and center. Star Fox Adventures takes place 8 years after Andross was defeated at the end of Star Fox 64. Thank God, now we can finally have a unique final boss. Krystal, the female sexy version of Fox, is searching for the truth about her parents' death when she receives a distress signal from, see, I told you this game was called Dinosaur Planet. Already, you can see that this game has had a huge graphical improvement from the N64, as it should, and everything seems amazing. Oh yeah. There's voice acting in this game. But for some reason they talk in this weird gibberish language with subtitles. What is the point of adding voice acting if you're just gonna add subtitles anyway? The only thing I can think of is that they wanted voice acting, but they didn't want to change it for every language, so they just made them speak like this and only would need to change the subtitles. But that still doesn't make sense because later on they do speak in English, so all I have to ask is, Rare, what the fuck? Krystal then immediately gets captured by an evil lizard, which is how you know it's a Nintendo game. But unlike Princess Peach, she actually escapes. Wait, holy shit! He actually tried to kill her! Damn, Bowser. This generic enemy that will never appear in any game after this is already more intimidating than you. Krystal is saved and heads off to Dinosaur Planet to find the source of the distress signal. Now here is where the real game begins. I made a video a few months ago about the black sheep of certain Nintendo franchises, and I got a few comments saying why I didn't mention Star Fox in this game specifically. And to be honest, I have no idea how I forgot about this, but it's so much different than any other Star Fox game. Everyone knows Star Fox for being full of spaceships and dogfights. That pun was not intended, and now I'm wondering if that's why Nintendo chose a fox to be the main character. Anyways, Star Fox is basically a cross between Star Wars and a petting zoo. But Star Fox Adventures immediately shows us that this game is a new experience where you actually get to play as the characters in a 3D environment, which I would say is most similar to the 3D Zelda games. This obviously sets up a completely different game than anything before it with a new story, level design, new controls, which I am all for. Krystal continues to explore where she landed, where she encounters a wounded Earthwalker, which is basically just a fancy name for Triceratops, who also speaks in gibberish for some reason. He tells her to collect the Krazoa spirits, which will help the dinosaurs against General Scales. Yeah, that's the evil lizard's name from before. I didn't mention it because it's stupid as fuck. Krystal releases the first spirit, but is then trapped inside a crystal. A not so subtle pun on her name, but I like the concept, so I'll give it to them. And finally, after like 30 minutes of game time, we are finally introduced to the main character of the game, Slippy Toad! Nah, he's a loser. Star Fox. And here's what I was talking about with the voice acting making no sense. Everyone in Star Fox speaks English, and I just don't understand why every character couldn't just speak the same language. And yes, Slippy sounds just as annoying as always.
That should be it, Rob. Go it.
The crew is sent on a mission to Dinosaur Planet by General Pepper because they are desperate for money. Who knew I could relate to a fox so well? Fox heads out, and of course, it wouldn't be a Star Fox game without some spaceship gameplay. All the controls are pretty much the same as every other game, but this section is very short and it's just to get Fox to Dinosaur Planet for the main gameplay. So I mentioned the gameplay earlier, but now it's time to really dive into it. The game is a 3D adventure unlike anything Star Fox had ever seen before. You get to run around as Fox McCloud and explore all around Dinosaur Planet. You don't start with a weapon until you find the staff that Krystal was using earlier. Also, how the f does Fox understand what Krystal is saying here? Is he reading the subtitles too? This staff is your main way of combat, which allows you to lock onto enemies in order to attack them, and holy shit, this is just like Zelda. The staff can be used for offense and defense, as well as used for puzzles consistently throughout the game. This is one of the most convenient items in any game I've ever seen. You literally use this thing for everything, and it becomes even more amazing because you can gather these gems that are used to power up your staff. It becomes more than just a melee weapon, but also can fire projectiles and even allows you to perform these special jumps. I'm just saying, the Master Sword ain't got shit on this staff. Because the name of the planet is literally Dinosaur Planet, you can probably guess what the majority of the characters are in this game. Yep, you guessed it. Woolly mammoths! Basically, all the characters are either dinosaurs or creatures based on animals from prehistoric eras. I love this idea, especially in a universe that already features talking humanoid foxes. This still feels foreign and weird and unlike anything we expected, and the planet in general is phenomenally designed. All the different regions and cities all feel different, but all feel realistic to a world like this. Sometimes games will have an area that just feels out of place, but Dinosaur Planet doesn't really have anything like that. And remember, this game came out in 2002 and was originally designed for the N64, yet this game looks amazing. The colors are vibrant and is one of the most beautiful GameCube games in my opinion. Sure, Fox's new look did take some time to get used to, but when you really think about it, it's way more accurate to how he would probably look than Star Fox 64. All the characters look great, some more than others. Everything in this game looks great, and my only real gripe is that the world is called Dinosaur Planet. I get that the name comes from the original game and that the name is probably the most accurate name of a world I've ever heard, but I still would have preferred a more unique name for a planet with dinosaurs than Dinosaur Planet. It sounds like something I would have come up with when I was like 3. The entirety of this game is basically traveling to different points on Dinosaur Planet to complete the objectives that the game gives you. To be fair, that does sound like a pretty accurate description of every 3D adventure game ever, but it does feel different in Star Fox Adventures. There's not much downtime between objectives, and it feels like constant action, which I think is a good thing and a bad thing. I like consistently having something to do because the game never lets you get bored. But at the same time, I wish there were more little side missions to complete. They don't even have to be anything major, but just small secrets that let you get some power up or upgrade would add so much to the experience. I might be getting a little too nitpicky here or whatever, but this entire game reminds me so much of a Zelda adventure, and that's part of what makes those games so memorable to me. And if you don't think I should compare this to Zelda games, there are literally giant bosses at the end of temples protecting special stones on a journey to save a girl trapped in a crystal. Oh yeah, but this is nothing like Zelda, right? Except for the fact that they really hammer home the fact that Fox has a boner on Krystal. With an adventure and story like this, Star Fox Adventures is easily the longest Star Fox game to date. Because of all the exploration and the fact that every level isn't just flying around shooting shit, this isn't a game that you can just beat super quickly. I think it's obvious at this point, but I'm a huge fan of longer games because if I'm spending $60, I better not be able to beat a game in like 2 hours. And since you can get this game for like $8 from GameStop, it really gives you a bang for your buck. Quite literally. After you complete all the quests and objectives, Fox finally sets Krystal free from her, well, Krystal, and saves her just before falling. And as soon as they make eye contact, they fall in love. Keep your rocket in your pocket, Fox. Fucking save her! A giant head that's totally not Andross floats towards them until Krystal takes her staff back and starts shooting it. Fox takes off in his R-Wing to take on the totally unique final boss. God damn it, of course it's Andross! I get that he's the main antagonist for Star Fox, but this would have been the perfect game to finally have a different boss for once. Although, I do love his design in this game. Andross really did have one of the biggest glow-ups between the first 3 games. But I'll give you one guess how to defeat him. If you guess shoot his glowing eyes, then shoot the glowing spots on his hand. Yeah, no shit, that's how you beat him. I do love this fight, as it's just classic Star Fox. But this is the only R-Wing fight in the entire game, and they just had to slap it in right at the end instead of a cool and unique boss. There were some pretty damn good boss fights in this game, so why just change up everything right at the last minute? It's weird that they changed basically the entire game away from the old formula, except for the final boss. After Andross is defeated, he fucking explodes, which means he must be gone for good, right? Nope. Dinosaur Planet is saved, and wait, where the f did Falco come from? And why does he look like such a badass? Krystal then shows up to say goodbye, and the game ends before we can see anything between them. Probably a good thing, because I don't think I want to see Fox and Krystal getting it on. I'm probably gonna get some flack for this, but that's perfectly fine. If you've watched my videos before, you know that I have a weird taste in video games, and that does not change here. Star Fox Adventures will always be my personal favorite Star Fox game, and I think it's the best one in the entire series. Most of you probably don't agree with me, as this game is so much different from pretty much all the other Star Fox games. But that's what makes me love it so much. Instead of just repeating the same formula over and over and over again, they actually tried something new. Rare has a history of absolutely nailing new ideas, as well as a recent history of those new ideas being a total pile of dog shit. But Star Fox Adventures is one of the great ideas. They didn't completely take out the R-Wing segments, but they really minimized it and focused on the 3D adventure and missions on Dinosaur Planet. If I was to predict a Star Fox adventure game, I would never expect something like this, and I probably would have expected him to have a gun like he has in Smash. The staff is unlike any weapon from any average 3D adventure game, and the whole world has a very unique vibe. I never mentioned this until now, but I was obsessed with dinosaurs as a kid, and this game brings that out of me. Call me biased if you want, but creating a world with dinosaurs as the main NPCs is amazing, and it makes so much sense for this series for some damn reason. If you've never picked this game up, or you aren't a fan of the normal Star Fox games, I highly recommend giving Star Fox Adventures a chance. You won't regret it. More franchises need to go out on a limb and take a chance like this. It worked for Mario, it worked for Zelda, and in my eyes, it worked phenomenally for Star Fox. And it doesn't hurt to add a sexy fox for all the lonely gamers and furries to stare at.
What am I doing?
Peppy here!
Fuck you, Peppy.